Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 25. I got Jennings Wright, who has traveled to several countries on different continents. I heard her speak at the Expat Money Summit, so I thought she'd be interesting to have on here. And she's part of a nonprofit called 1018, which helps young women who are expecting in Uganda. And she's also been to Nicaragua and some other places. How you doing, Jennings?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, tell me about your expat journey. How did that start? How did that begin?
Well, I first was an expat at the age of 10 when we moved to Guatemala for my dad's work. He had citrus groves in Florida, and he was hired to go to Guatemala to set up a concentrate plant. And we lived in Guatemala for about a year, while in Guatemala City, and then went out to where he worked. So that was my first journey as an expat. We have lived in Nicaragua for a couple years. We had a hotel in San Juan del Sur. I've been to 67 countries and traveled a lot. Been now 14 times. I'll be taking my 15th trip to Uganda and have spent, I figured it out once. It's like the equivalent of 14 months ish in Uganda. So, and when we first started going, I had a friend from New Zealand who lived there for about 13 years. So I lived in her home, and we didn't act like tourists. We acted like, went to the grocery store and stuff like you do when you live somewhere.
Yeah, how many languages do you speak?
I speak Spanish, not as well as I would like. Like I was just in Panama, and it comes back to me, but I don't in my life have a lot of ability to speak it. My son speaks 6 tribal languages from Uganda, East African, Swahili plus 6. He went and lived in Tanzania to learn Swahili. He's very gifted at languages. I am unfortunately not gifted at languages. I'm very good at English. I've written books and stuff, so.
Yeah, so yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so how old's your son, by the way?
He's my youngest. He's 26.
Okay, so
Yeah.
okay,
So my girls learned Spanish, but he's the language guy. Like the tribal languages to me all sound very similar. If you hear it, and I'll say something and he's like, "Mom, no, that is not this, that is that." And I'm like, "Okay, I just can't even hear. I can't hear those differences."
I
So,
suspect if you don't know the languages, they probably might sound a little bit similar. Just the same way that Spanish and Portuguese might sound similar. You won't be able to
yeah.
pick, you're going to have to know those to pick up on the differences. Of course, there's lots of different factors involved. But
Yeah.
so you so you've been so did your kids go with you? It sounds like you.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah, so we homeschooled our kids. And so I started going to Uganda actually 14 years ago. Yeah, in January this year. And because we homeschooled, my 2 younger ones went. So my middle daughter was 16, 15, turning 16. And then my son was 12. And so my daughter went 5 times. My son has been 10 times. He went with me in 2020 as well. And then he lived in Tanzania for 3.5 months. He just decided he wanted to go and get better at Swahili. So when he was in college, he just took a semester off and went to Tanzania.
Well, yeah, I believe the term they like to use for that is world schooling.
Yeah. Well, and as homeschoolers and so we're self-employed, we homeschooled, we homeschooled specifically so we could travel, really. So my kids are very world savvy, travel savvy.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, and you certainly don't look like you're old enough to have a 26-year-old, but we won't get into that. So you
I'm 57, so I can have
wow,
a
yeah,
26-year-old.
yeah. I certainly wouldn't have said that, but anyway. So yeah, so you've so this is interesting. So you've actually had a business all these years that you could run from any location.
Yeah, really, even before remote was a thing, my husband has really run our for-profit. We have four for-profit businesses that are synergetic, so it's not as complicated as it seems. With a lot of phone and email, because a lot of our clients were out of town or out of state anyway. So they would call back in the days when people actually called on the phone, or email. And so the time zone or the internet connection has really been, the more important thing, just because obviously with a for profit business, you need to get back to somebody. But we've been able to travel a good bit and he can work. I think in 30 plus years of marriage, he's taken 1 week actually off. Like where he didn't work at all that whole week. So
That's very interesting. So it sounds like you've had a really, really great life. Yeah, you did the remote thing before remote was a thing, or the digital nomad thing. And said, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you do with? Do you have a lot of stuff, or do you keep your stuff in a storage unit someplace, or what do you do with that? Do you have somebody who's managing
When we
things for you at
travel
home, or yeah?
or in Uganda? When we
I mean,
travel?
yeah. I mean, you're an American, so do you have
Right.
do you keep that stuff at home, or I mean, do you have somebody who goes and checks on your storage now and then, or what, or you just don't have storage, or how's that work?
Well, when we moved to Nicaragua, we got rid of everything. We've had for over 21 years now a very small house at the coast, which is where I am right now. And we rented our other house and got rid of our cars, got rid of our boat, got rid of just stuff, and kept this house because our kids would use it. And we knew that if we came home, so for instance, when we lived in Nicaragua, we had a hotel. After Easter, Semana Santa, the hotel business really died off. And so we thought that would be the time that we would come home, and we wanted someplace to come home to. We didn't want to just go have to squat at our kids' house or something. So we kept this house. And then when we moved back from Nicaragua unexpectedly, we just kept renting the other house. We have since renovated it because for business reasons, we had to move back into it. But yeah, so we have downsized to almost nothing and then upsized back up to life.
Yeah. So yeah. So what's the nature of the business you're in?
We have the ones that are related are all shopping center related maintenance things, parking lot sweeping, asphalt painting, pressure washing, HVAC, whatever, anything outside a shopping center. Some inside, but mostly outside. And then the other business is concert staging for the big arenas in our city. So we have an arena, an outdoor amphitheater, big outdoor amphitheater, and a smaller outdoor amphitheater. Plus, we do some corporate staging. And now the big thing is video game competition staging. That's a huge thing, which is very odd to me. They rent the whole convention center and it's a 11-day deal. I mean, it's crazy, but so that's what we do.
Yeah, so that's good. Yeah, so that's a business you can manage, from distances. But I have to agree that probably the biggest obstacle is the time zone difference. I mean, if you say go to Mexico or go to South America, you don't really deal with that. But if you
Right.
go to Europe or go to Asia or Africa, you do have to deal with that. So
Yeah. I had to come back one time from Uganda because we had something happen in the business and in the shopping center business. And I'm not as involved in that as I used to be, but I was more involved. And so I would get an email. I got the original email with the problem. I responded. They didn't get, because of the 8-hour time difference, they didn't get back to me till the next morning. By the time I responded and they responded, it was the next day. And finally, I mean, it was like an urgent issue. And I finally just had to get on a plane and leave and come back because that was actually faster than trying to do this whole, now this was prior to the days of like Signal and Telegram, which make things a lot easier. But yeah, I finally just had to say I'm leaving and fly back. So it's a lot easier now than it used to be. The other thing too,
Yeah.
I was in Uganda for a 3.5-week trip, and we had power 4 days of the whole trip. So if you don't have power, you also can't work other than from your, whatever you can do from your phone. And so if you're not somewhere where power is stable, and it wasn't super stable in Nicaragua, actually, between the time difference and the power, your digital nomad thing, you need to take those into consideration.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's definitely a lot of things you need to take into consideration because you started this when exactly?
2009.
Okay. So so you were running the business. Your kids were obviously not, sometimes your kids were at home, but after 2009, your kids were always on the road. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't spend 100% of the time on the road, but we have spent a lot of periods of time on the road, and yeah, and the other thing, like if you're looking somewhere to move, one of the reasons we picked Nicaragua was my grandmother at the time was still alive, and my mom is alive, and our kids didn't go with us. Our youngest was still in college, and it's 29 hours of travel, 26 to 29 hours of travel to Uganda, and then another 26 to 29 hours of travel back from Uganda. So we didn't want to have an emergency happen, and then it's 2 days, 8 time zones, all that. And actually, when we lived in Nicaragua, my son had emergency appendectomy, and even from Nicaragua, I couldn't get a flight till that night. I had to drive to Managua, which was 2.5 hours. Spent the night in Managua, got on the flight. I didn't get him until 8 o'clock the next night, even from Nicaragua. And that's like the fastest everything I could get, So one of the reasons we chose Nicaragua is it's easier than, for instance, Uganda.
Yeah. So Uganda just happened to be the place you wanted to go, or what?
Well, I actually had
what made you go to Uganda, say, versus Botswana or Kenya or the Central African Republic or Cameroon or someplace like that?
So the wife of the pastor who married us and I connected on Facebook over Christmas 2008. And I had started a nonprofit, done all the paperwork with the IRS and all that stuff in the fall of 2008. We were actually on a trip with our kids in December, and when I got the approval from the IRS that I was a 501c3. And over that Christmas holiday, and I was in 2009, not exactly a Facebook person, but I had an illness, and so I had all this time, and I got on Facebook and reconnected with my friend Suzanne, who was married to an American, but from New Zealand, and they were living in Uganda. And so we started talking, and they were homeschooling, and we were talking about that. And then she just said, "Hey, I work with this nonprofit in the slum, and you have this nonprofit. Would you be able to help out and help them rent a building?" And my first thought was, rent a building? I mean, how much does it cost to rent a building? It didn't cost that much. It was like $1,200 for the whole year. But anyway, my middle daughter and her daughter are just like 2 months apart in age and had known each other for like 7 or 8 years. So my daughter went over to visit, then my son and I went over to visit. And once we were all there, we were like, this is where we want to be. This is what we want to do. So that's how I ended up in Uganda.
Yeah. So yeah, and you've been to other. What places when you travel did you really, really find fascinating, and what places did you think, yeah, I might like to live here more? I mean,
I am a sailor. I grew up sailing. So I have been to almost every Caribbean country, all over the Bahamas. We used to sail down to the Bahamas and spend the summers down there. So put me on any Caribbean island, anyone, just put me on one and I would be super happy just because my sailor's heart that love that. I really love the UK. I've spent quite a bit of time in the UK. I've been to a lot of, I haven't been all over Europe. My husband and I actually were supposed to go to Italy for our anniversary in March of 2020, and we were supposed to land in Venice, which was closed in 2020. So I still haven't been to Italy. I really liked Greece. I actually went to, I really liked Egypt, although I don't know that I would like to live there. I would like to go back and spend more time there because it obviously both Greece and Egypt are. I went on the same trip to Egypt and Greece, and as a history person, I wouldn't say I'm a buff, but I like, our whole family's kind of history oriented. I really liked going to those places that are so ancient, and this is the same with the UK too. And Wales is beautiful, and I have friends in the UK, so I could probably go anywhere at least for a few months and be
Like
fine.
you could go visit where Columbus first, landed in the Americas.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, really, if you take the entire Caribbean Sea all the way to Venezuela and just throw a dart, that would be fine. I'd be happy with that.
Yeah. What kind of sailboat do you have, or what kind of sailing did you do? I mean, and it sounds like you probably started this at a pretty young age, didn't you?
Yeah, I grew up sailing. I mean, literally from an infant. My dad grew up sailing. He used to do, there used to be something called the Southern Ocean Racing Conference. They don't do it anymore. But it was a 3-week sailing trip, and it was a race, and they would go from Florida to Bermuda and down to the Caribbean somewhere. It was different every year, and then back to Florida, and it was 3 weeks. And he used to do that every year. And then I grew up just sailing on the east and the Space Coast area of Florida in the Indian River. We'd do ocean racing. We would take the boat to the Bahamas. I mean, I just spent in fact, my mom recently sent me a photo she found from 1972 of the catalog from the citrus business that we used to have. That was our sailboat with the spinnaker flying, and my parents and some of their friends are on the boat. That was the cover of the catalog of the Pioneer Seminole Groves. That was the name of it. I just had a moment. So, I mean, that's just how I spent my life. And I still have kind of that sailor mentality. I'm just kind of like, I'm chill, So.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of boats are these actual sailboats, or are they just kind of boats that have motors, or, I mean?
Oh no. I mean, I don't have a sailboat now. I grew up sailing on a Morgan 30, named the Button, which was what my dad called me, the Button. And the spinnaker had a big orange on it. Then my grandparents got a Newport 33, which was boat number 1, hull number 1 of Newport, made on the East Coast because it's a Pacific boat. And so they had hull number 1, and my grandmother sailed until she was 93. And then she decided that the people that she sailed with, who were 10 years younger than she was, were too old. And so she gave me her sailboat, and we actually brought it up here to Beaufort, North Carolina, and had it for a while. But the rest of my family is more powerboat oriented. So I ended up selling it to a guy from Newfoundland who came down with his Chihuahuas, and they had these tiny little life jackets, and he sailed the boat back up to Newfoundland from here. So that was the last sailboat I had myself. Now we have 2 boats, 2 jet skis, a kayak, 2 kayaks, a boat, 2 boats, 2 jet skis, 2 kayaks, not sailboats though.
Yeah. So what's the first, how fast do you usually, when you sail, how fast does that usually go? I mean, how many miles per
6
hour?
or 8
I guess
knots. It's 6 knots is probably about average. Now there are some boats that go faster, and there was a guy from Coco. We would go to the Bahamas, and he would come over. He had a 50 4-foot boat named Dealer, and that boat would surf at like 13 knots, which is really fast for a sailboat. I mean, just a standard non-racing, non-professional racing sailboat. It's just cruising along, just going. We have a lot of sailboats go by here, and Oriental, North Carolina, which is just up the waterway, calls itself a little drinking town with a sailing problem. That's on their t-shirts. Oriental, North Carolina, a drinking town with a sailing problem. So I'm still in the community. We just don't do it. I don't have any friends that sailboats.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So did you ever do any racing or anything like that? Or was it all just, for fun?
We did. I mean, we did. Every Wednesday night in the summertime, there would be races. When I went to college in Tennessee, I would drive home every third weekend. I would drive home on Friday after class, race on Saturday. We had ocean races on Saturday. I would go home to crew, and then I'd drive back, leaving Sunday at midnight, and drive all night to get back to Tennessee for class. And I did that every 3 weeks, like my entire sophomore year. So what I wanted to be when I grew up was a charter boat captain. That was my goal in life as a teenager, was to be a charter boat captain in the Caribbean and the Bahamas. It didn't happen, but that was my goal.
Okay, so where else? So you've been to most of the Caribbean islands.
Mm-hmm.
What other places have you been to that really stood out?
Well, I've been to Venezuela and Colombia, all the Caribbean, a good bit of Europe, Japan, Egypt, Uganda. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Canada. So I've done, I've done a good bit. I was an only child, so my grandparents took me on trips with them growing up. And so I was very blessed to be able to go a lot of places with them on their travels, because I guess they just needed a young companion. I'm not sure. It was fun though.
Yeah. So you've been to, anywhere else? I mean, besides sailing, I mean, sounds like you've been to Asia and Africa and Europe as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just visiting. I haven't sailed to all of those places, obviously. I mean, but I have spent, I like most people, you kind of go through phases in your life where you're first out of college and you have a job and you get no vacation time and all that, or don't have any money. So, but we gave our kids a trip for Christmas instead of gifts for a long time, until they were we couldn't coordinate because they were adults. So travel's just, even if it's more in the Southeast or something, is always just a big part of our DNA, big part. I spent a lot of time in Mexico, a lot of time. I lived in Guatemala, lived in Nicaragua, Panama, Honduras, been to Honduras, been to Belize, been to, I just think you should see it all. See whatever you can see.
Yeah. What places, where did you feel the least safe of all the places you've been to?
That's an interesting question. I think in general, I haven't felt hugely unsafe, but I also, and this is why I used to tell people at the hotel, because our hotel in Nicaragua was just a short block off the beach, and then it was like a 10-minute walk to San Juan del Sur. And we got a lot of Sunday fun day people and a lot of people coming down, and they would be like, well, is it safe? And I said, well, are you going to walk home drunk on the beach and flashing your iPhone? Because then no, it's not safe. But if you act like a reasonably responsible person, then it's probably safe. I mean, I have had things stolen. I have probably felt more unsafe physically in the US than anywhere where I was outside the US. I will say it's possible that I just have my guard up a little bit more when I'm not in the US than when I'm here, I mean, things get if you're in a poor country, stuff's going to be stolen. I actually went to the store today and I put my purse in the cart and I just walked away from the cart in the grocery store with my purse right in the thing. And my purse was there. It was fine because here that's what people do. But you would never do that in Uganda or Nicaragua or anywhere. I mean, you keep it on you. In Uganda, if we're walking, I work in the slum, so we put it around to the front. I've had 5 phones stolen in Uganda.
And sometimes, there's also, there's what I call more nuisance crime, and then there's the more violent crime,
Right.
I mean, people may steal, pick your pocket. The kind of people most of the people who pick your pocket would never kill you. There's different levels of crime, obviously, but and I mean, where did you feel, where did you feel like it was I mean, I've heard different things. I mean, obviously, and it seems like, some cases, the more richer places, people just steal, but it's a different kind of stealing, it's.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for physical safety, like in Uganda, well, in Nicaragua too, at our hotel, we had a guard and we had a fence and we had a gate. And in Uganda, the places that I stay have guards and gates and fences. And I have a friend, he's a driver by profession, but he's my driver when I'm there. He actually was just here at Christmas visiting. And he's the Ugandan national CrossFit champion. So I go around with Derek and I don't really have a whole lot of concern about my physical safety because Derek's my driver, my translator, my liaison, and he's the strongest guy in Uganda. So, I don't worry too much about it. I just think you have to be prudent and aware of your surroundings these days anywhere you are,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely have to be aware of your surroundings now and then. That's certainly true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But people ask me, and I have never felt unsafe in Uganda. I've never been in a situation 14 times there where I was concerned about my safety. That's not true. My son and I did a walking safari. The very first trip we were there, we did a walking safari. What I learned with that is the animals just run away because they don't like you walking. But anyway, we're walking with our guard, and all of a sudden, not the guard, the ranger, and he chambers around in his AK-47. All of a sudden, just now, my 12-year-old son thought that was awesome. I and my friend Suzanne did not think that was awesome, and it turned out there was a leopard in a tree right ahead of us. That is the only time, like, the hair on the back of my neck stood up and we backed up slowly, and he's got the gun, and I'm like, okay, this is not good. That's probably the only time.
Yeah. So where else did you go in Africa besides Uganda and a few other countries nearby?
That's all. When I go, it's funny because most people don't realize how big Africa is. So we had friends, they have retired, but they used to live in Zambia. And when I first started going to Uganda, she's like, just stop by in Zambia on your way back. And I'm like, first of all, it's like a 9-hour flight from Uganda to Zambia. I mean, it's far. And second of all, so you don't just stop by, Africa is huge. So I've been to Egypt, which is obviously North Africa, and then just to Uganda. I would love to go. I've read a series of books that are set in Botswana. So I've always wanted to go to Botswana. But again, from Entebbe to I'm not sure if it's Johannesburg or Cape Town, that's a 7-hour flight. So Africa is huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Well, and of course, most countries in Africa, you can't really fly to them directly, except from any other country in Africa. I mean, there's a few. I mean, a few of the big cities have direct flights from, say, Europe or Asia, but most of them, obviously, you can't fly to Europe from. I don't believe you can fly from Europe anywhere to Uganda, right? I mean, unless you go through someplace else.
No, I fly through. No, you can fly to Entebbe. I mean, Entebbe has a international airport, which was just repossessed by the Chinese. But they do still have one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I
so
understand
I
a lot of
usually,
usually you have to go through. You might have to go through Nairobi or go through Lagos or go through.
no, I mean, you can fly directly from, I fly normally, I either change in, well, we used to change in London, but uh, they don't do the flight from London anymore. But I usually go through Brussels or Amsterdam. Um, I've gone Emirates and Qatar, so all the way over there and then down. Hated Emirates, love Qatar, but it's a like 14-hour flight, and I really would prefer to go through and have 8 out 8.5 than 14. But yeah, I usually go Amsterdam or Brussels.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. So how long have you been? So you have an organization called 1018 in Uganda. Can you tell us a little bit
Right.
about what you're doing with 1018 in Uganda, please?
Yes. So we work with primarily with teen moms and teen girls in Uganda's largest slum, which is called Namwango. It's in Kampala. It has over 30,000 people living there. It's a very, very poor, very, very large. Well, it's by space, it's not so large, but tons and tons of people live there. And we do crisis residential programs for teen moms. We have a vocational school, clinic, daycare. We do community outreach. I also work with two very poor schools in Western Uganda. In one is in Mbarara and one is inside Lake Mburo National Park. And but that's less than 10% of the work that I do. The rest of it is at Touch the Slum, which is in Namwango.
Yep. So this helps teen girls who have babies.
Yeah.
And you,
So the main issue, about 50% of teen girls in the slum get pregnant, and largely it is they are abused or exploited, or especially during they Uganda had very, very draconian lockdowns. And, when you're starving, you do the things you need to do to not be starving. Also, it culturally, like if a family in the slum, the mother might say to her daughter to go out and do sex work to bring money into the family so they don't get evicted. So there are a number of cultural issues that make teen pregnancy high. Um, So we have girls from 14 to 17 when they come to us. We have the Ross House, which is they're usually homeless. By the time they come to us, they're very ill. So the Ross House is sort of the crisis, get them back on their feet place. Then they move to the Subi House, which is more of a transition house. We also have a dorm, which is for girls that are in the vocational program who become homeless while they're in our program. We have about 100 girls every day on the compound. About 3 dozen of those are teen moms. The rest of them are just teen girls. And then obviously we work with those to not become teen moms. That's not the ideal, but if they are a teen mom, we're not condemning them. We're just trying to help them learn a sustainable skill. We teach hairdressing, basic and advanced tailoring, photography, videography, video editing, and we have a computer lab. So we have a lot of skills that we teach them to try and have a sustainable income for themselves.
yeah. Uganda is Uganda probably the poorest country you've been to, or have there been others that are maybe where there's even more where things are even more?
Well, I have been to Haiti, although I
Yeah.
didn't live in Haiti. I'd been to Haiti. So I would say Haiti is the poorest country I've been to. But I
Okay.
would say, as far as the poorest country I've spent any time in, it would definitely be Uganda. I mean, the people that we work with are making less than $1 a day. And inflation has been so bad this year. Our food costs on some things have more than tripled. And these are the basic things that people eat, the cheapest things they can eat. So they're making, $3 to $5 a week. So it's very poor,
Yeah.
very poor.
What do you think is the solution for a country like Uganda to get out of poverty? I mean, I know Uganda, years ago had the very infamous Idi Amin, who was
Yeah.
largely considered a butcher, and there's been a lot of violence and genocide in Africa, the Rwandan genocide, which isn't too far away. And although it sounds like Rwanda's recovered quite a bit, and you have some other countries where you have just civil wars like in Cameroon, and a lot of this stuff doesn't even appear on Americans' radar. But what is the long-term solution of, getting out of poverty in these countries? Because
Well, the what they think is the long-term solution and what is happening is, and I'll talk about leadership in Uganda in a minute, but so Africa has really been taken over by the Belt and Road, China's Belt and Road initiative. So Uganda is basically owned by the Chinese. Like I said, they literally repossessed the international airport last year because Uganda signed a loan, signed documents for a loan, and somebody didn't read it all the way, and they missed payments, and so China now owns the airport in Entebbe, and they are putting in a gold mine, which a friend of mine with another nonprofit works in. We've been up there, and they're trying to displace 2 million people so that the Chinese can mine gold, and weren't going to pay them anything. They were just going to kick them off. My friend, because she happens to be in the US and found out about it, they've gotten lawyers involved, and the Chinese are not going to get off quite so easily. They own the railroad. They found oil in Uganda about 12 years ago. The Chinese have the right to get the oil if they ever do it. So what African countries think is the Chinese come in with all this money, they put in a port, they put in a railroad, they mine all this stuff. We get some money from it, which is way less than the Chinese get from it. The Chinese move all their people there. They only hire Ugandans for like janitorial, security. Everybody that works in virtually any factory or anything that's Chinese, they are Chinese people. You get on a plane, like when I got on the plane in Qatar, in Doha to go, our plane was 80% Chinese people in January 2020 going to work, and then coming back, it was the same. They were leaving. So that's not the way, but that's the way they've been sold, is the way, right? They think they aren't having to put this investment in. The Chinese are putting this investment in, and so this is how we modernize. As far as African dictators go, Uganda, Museveni, who is 37 years now the president of Uganda and keeps getting elected, isn't so bad. But Africa has just a massive leadership problem, and they are all thieves. So Museveni keeps taking loans out from the IMF for $150 million, and then literally nothing happens in the country. So where do you think $150 million went? Yeah. Not to, or $1 billion or whatever it is. So, there's a ton of corruption. Latin America has a corruption problem. I mean, there's just a ton of corruption, and a ton of influence from the Chinese. So they need to be innovative. They need to be educating their people better. Their education system is terrible. It does not inspire creative thinking. It does not inspire problem solving. It does not inspire any kind of competencies, really. And those things, no matter how much infrastructure they get in, if they don't fix those, they're just going to have Chinese people in there working because there's no Ugandans that can do the work.
Yeah, and I doubt the Chinese are going to do much to help the Ugandans out, but it doesn't.
No, they just want the space and the minerals and the oil.
But is it also fair to say that the minerals wouldn't be, if the Chinese didn't go in, would the minerals ever get taken out of the ground? I mean,
well, I mean, in an ideal world, and maybe 100 years ago, this would if we had some of the technology, but not so much of the corruption in the world or whatever, somebody would support them. Like Botswana, for
Yeah.
instance, did it themselves. They discovered gold or diamonds in Botswana. Botswana was
Yeah.
extremely poor and extremely not developed, and they developed diamonds. The Botswanans developed the diamond mines. The money went to Botswana. It stayed in Botswana.
Yeah.
People in Botswana got to share in the price, in the costs, or the value of the diamond. And everybody in Botswana was lifted up because of that.
Yeah. I mean,
But
but I would
that
think,
was 25 years ago or whatever. And in the culture we're in now, they're just coming in, China would have owned those diamonds if that
sure,
was
yeah.
now.
But, but obviously, mining equipment is extremely costly. I mean,
Right.
it's not like, you can just snap your fingers and it appears. I mean, and obviously things like the railroads too, I mean,
Right. Well,
a lot
airports
of
were that
places would,
way.
a lot of places would not have airports or railroads if they'd not been colonized. I mean,
Right. And what, so my grandfather was a vice president of Pan American Airlines, and Pan American put in all of the the Central and South American airports. My grandfather, when we lived in Nicaragua, my grandfather was there building, when he was a young man, building the Managua airport. And so, but they went in and helped that, and it was more of a public-private initiative with sort of, it was not altruistic only. They got something out of it, but it wasn't, we're going to come in and take everything we can take. The world was a little bit more, yes, we're coming in to help you, and yes, we're getting something out of it, but we also want you to have it. Like when the Panama Canal was given back. I just saw the Panama Canal 3 weeks ago. They did something, but then they gave it back. And now the Panamanians are making the money from the canal that the Americans used to make from the canal. So unfortunately, that is not what seems to be happening now.
Yeah. So, where else have you been in Europe and Asia?
The only place in Asia I've been is Japan, and I love to travel, and my kids and I talk, because my son had some friends that lived in South Korea for a few years, and then he got older, but his parents moved to China. They were teaching English in schools, and I just never wanted to go anywhere in Asia. I don't know why. If somebody gave me a free trip, I'd do it. But if somebody said, "Here's money to go on a trip," the last place I probably would choose would be Asia. I just don't. I'd never. It doesn't fascinate me. I don't. I'd go, but there's a lot of places I want to go first. Europe, I've been pretty much everywhere except for Italy and Germany and Switzerland. All of which, well, Italy, I would definitely. Italy's been on my. It's probably the place I've wanted to go the longest time in my life that I haven't been, and then COVID killed it. COVID killed my trip. So.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did they do with Corona hysteria in Uganda? These are places where they can't just afford to shut down the economy over.
Oh, they did.
Yeah, you have all these visionaries who think they can, but then you talk about, well, I don't even like to use the word leadership anymore, because there is such a thing as good leadership, but
yeah,
the political problem is a problem everywhere, but you just manage to have some systems that can overcome that.
Uganda was a disaster, an absolute unmitigated disaster. They did a lockdown, and I mean a lockdown. Everybody was locked down where they were. So when they started at the end of March, and they said, so in the slum in particular, a lot of the economy is what would be called the informal economy. It's people hawking stuff on the street, people making mandazi on the street, or selling maize, roasted maize, or hawking clothes, or selling vegetables, right? You don't have a shop, you don't have a business, you just do it. That's informal economy. They immediately shut the entire informal economy down, which is 100% of the people in the slum who make day-to-day money, and that's the only money they have is day-to-day. If you had a stall in an official government market, and there's not that many of those around the slums, but like there's, I think maybe 5 in Kampala official buildings for a market. You had to live there, open air. No, there's no toilet and it's open air. You had to live there because if you left, you couldn't come back. They shut everybody in their houses. They said they were going to give people food. They didn't give anybody food. And by the time they gave the very few people who got food, it was like 4 months in. So people were killing their kids because they couldn't feed them. People, I mean, they were, so they had this, the first lockdown went from, they closed the schools at the end of March 2020. The schools opened January 28th this year. The schools in the entire country were closed from March 2020 to the end of January 2022. They told the teachers they couldn't come back unless they were going to get vaccinated. The teachers didn't want to get vaccinated, but they also had to get other jobs because when they did have they opened up from September. I think September they gradually, like very gradually opened up 2020. Then they had another hard lockdown. I was supposed to go in August of 2021 and I had to cancel my trip because the only thing open, like the only thing on the road was allowed to be a lorry bringing food or charcoal. That's it. It was the only thing allowed on the road. And so they said, well, tourists can come as long as you go to tourist places. And I was like, well, I'm not going to tourist places. So I didn't go. They killed people who were on their way to the hospital. They shot people on their way to the hospital with COVID. They're going to the hospital with COVID and they shot them and killed them. There was an election during that time. And Bobby Wine, who was running for president, who's from the slum, he was a rapper, absolutely not old Museveni guy. They put him under house arrest. They killed 54 people at one of his rallies. They shut down all the rallies. They wouldn't let him have any rallies. And then they had this election where everybody was supposed to be masked and distanced and nobody was accountable and they didn't let the UN in and all that stuff. So, I mean, it was terrible. And in some places, 2/3 of teenage girls were pregnant and they only counted girls 15 to 19. They didn't count girls under 15.
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, people were actually killing their kids. I mean,
yeah, people were killing their children because they couldn't feed them.
Yeah. And these are people who already were pretty poor to begin with, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I
mean, the whole economy shut down.
Yeah,
they were confiscating bicycles. If you went out on your bicycle to get food and the police got you, they beat you up and took your bicycle.
Wow. And I probably don't even have to ask if these people have cars, but they probably don't. But
no, they no.
And so
most of them don't even have bicycles.
Yeah. And so also, there really isn't much in the way of birth control in these countries, is there?
Well, so it has 2 things that it's number 1 in. It's the most entrepreneurial country in the world. And it has 3 things actually. It's the most entrepreneurial country in the world. It's the youngest population in the world. 65% of Ugandans are under 18. And it has the highest incidence of AIDS in the world. So the government gives away condoms, but the men don't want to use them. Partly because the government did a campaign about 10 years ago where they put notices everywhere. And they basically said that if you got circumcised, you wouldn't get AIDS. And so you could go for really cheap and get circumcised. So they're all like, hey, I went and did that. I don't need to wear a condom. So, and it's not available for women. So if the guy doesn't do it, it's not done. So it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, because because one of my friends often says the number one cause of poverty is people having kids when they can't afford them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the infant mortality rate is so high. And it's very dangerous for these teenage girls to be having babies physically. They're high risk because, I mean, we had a 15-year-old who had a baby recently, and we have a nonprofit that does free childbirth. but she was so high risk because of her age and development stage that they sent her to the hospital, which of course gives us a bigger bill.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's just a lot of problems. A lot of problems.
Yeah, and I assume it probably still has a pretty low life expectancy when compared to the rest of the world. I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
the
when I
most
first,
developed
it's
countries.
better. When I first started going, it was 54 for women and 51 for men. And I think
Yeah,
now it's 10 years more, 61. Now, I don't know counting
yeah,
COVID, but it's about 10 years more than when I started going 14
yeah,
years ago. Still much lower. I mean,
yeah,
obviously 60 something is like I go and I'm 57 and they're like, my mom's going with me and she's 81 and there's nobody 81 that looks like looks like my mom. Um, and so they're always surprised, but yeah, I mean, it's the life expectancy. Now, there's some very wealthy people in Uganda and a reasonable, if not huge, middle to upper middle class, but there's a huge, I mean, most of the population is obviously poverty level and below.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, really, from 2010 to 2019, that was really one of the best decades the world has ever had. I mean, you talked about the
yeah.
increased life expectancy in Uganda, and I mean, a lot of these countries like Uganda, even though they obviously they're still not in a great situation, but their situations were vastly improved, and until
Mhm.
and until everybody decided, well, until this pseudo emergency comes on and everybody just starts acting crazy, shutting
Yeah.
down the economy over the flu and all this stuff. I mean, I mean, as everyone said, these policies were a genocide. I
Yeah.
mean, they were a genocide,
Yeah.
and because one thing else I've learned too is the misery falls to the bottom.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
I mean, it hit countries like this. I mean, I knew people in Peru. I don't know if you've been to Peru. I mean, I probably
Mm-mm.
still have as many Facebook friends in Peru as I do any other country outside of the U.S. And I heard, you knew Gret Glyer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I
because I'm
mean,
on donor C.
yeah, I mean, he said they relied in Malawi. I mean, that they actually rioted there, and he just,
Yeah.
yeah,
They rioted some in
yeah,
Kampala, or in Uganda. The part of the problem was, I mean, first of all, the government, the MPs all got new cars during the lockdowns. Every single member of parliament got a new car
of
during the
course they did.
lockdowns. So because they have to go see their constituents, which they weren't allowed to do because everything was locked down.
Well, of
But
course
they
they did.
did,
Yeah, that I
right?
mean
But they did
that doesn't shock me.
expel,
Of course they did. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah. I mean,
But the fallout from it is still, it definitely has so many kids with school shut down for 2 years. First of all, in Uganda, the way school works is you pay even a free school. Like there's billboards that talk about the free school at Uganda's free schools. They're not free because you have to buy a uniform, you have to pay fees for everything. Test If you take a test, you have to pay a fee. And if you don't pay the fee, you don't get the test results, which means you don't get to move ahead. You have to bring this list of things like toilet paper and brooms and chalk and all this crazy stuff. So nobody goes. So people go like one term this year. There's 3 terms a year, calendar year, January through December. And then they might not go to another term till like the second term the next year. So you could be 20 in basically the third grade because you've only gone that many years. Well, then with they closed for 2 years, so many people aged out or just kind of got to the age where they're like, I'm not going to go. I'm 22. I'm not going to go sit in a classroom with a bunch of 10-year-olds, and even if they had the money. So the education was already terrible. And now you have this whole 2 years worth of time where nobody went. They put it on the radio. First of all, there's 60 languages in Uganda. English is the official language. Swahili is the second official language. You only learn English if you go to school. So if you haven't been to school, you don't know English. And nobody wants to speak Swahili unless they're over on the Kenya side, because that's what Idi Amin's soldiers spoke. They did a radio broadcast. You were supposed to do your school on the radio, but they did it in English. So if you were out in the village and you didn't speak English and you had 3 kids, you had to figure out your every subject for every kid, and then somebody had to speak English and translate it, and they had to somehow pay for the materials to do it. So nobody did it. It was the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. So you've got this whole generation that has, I mean, in America, they've lost a lot, but they're just, it's just done there. It's bad. It's so bad.
Yeah, 60 languages in Uganda. Wow, that's shocking. I mean, how many people live in Uganda?
44 million last I saw.
Oh, really? Oh, it's that many. So
Mhm.
that's still less than 1 million per language, though. It's
Yeah, and they're tribal language. So there's several base languages, like there's Bantu based languages, there's Luo based languages. And if you speak one and you meet somebody who speaks a Bantu based language, like Luganda, which is spoken in Kampala, because the king of the Buganda still lives in Kampala. And you go to Jinja and they speak Lusoga, you can understand each other because they're based on the same. It's like, I took Italian in college and I've taken Spanish, so I can sort of understand Italian and Spanish because they have the base that's the same. It's kind of the similar. Probably they're a little closer, but
certainly, yeah. I mean, I know there's sometimes, is this a language or is it a language family? I mean, that ends up becoming a debate, and I suppose with the growth of mass communication, you might see a fusion of the languages merging back together and becoming one. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, but obviously if these people learn English, though, they might say even be able to get a job as a remote computer programmer or something like that.
But they're not literate.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. That's one of the reasons we did our computer lab is we wanted to be able, so we have a literacy program. And we have, if we fill it up with 20 girls a term, we're going to be expanding to 40 this coming year, but last year was 20 girls a term. Once they can read and write English, then they go to their vocational class. And I mean, it's amazing because I see somebody that couldn't speak English, didn't know how to read and write in any language, taking notes. And I'm just like, holy cow, they're taking notes. But then they can also go in the computer lab and they're learning, not coding, but they're at least learning. So during COVID, the government took everything online. So national ID, virtually everything was moved online. Well, most people in Uganda don't even have power, much less have internet. So we're teaching them how to do all of that, how to make a document and make a simple spreadsheet and stuff like that. And that does give them a skill.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And certainly learning spreadsheets or even you learning Office is something good like that. I mean, do they sometimes maybe go to Kenya or someplace like that? Because it seems like Kenya or Tanzania is doing better than Uganda, or is there really not? Are they really not any better off if they go over there?
Kampala is a pretty cosmopolitan city. You've got all of the multinationals are there and embassies are there, and and Uganda is less crazy. It's really funny because if you're walking down the street or you go to a shopping area or something, you can pick out the Kenyans from the Ugandans just by watching them. Ugandans are very sort of self-contained and they speak very quietly and they're very humble and generous. And Kenyans are like it's like sort of the old Italian stereotype about talking with your hands and stuff. There is some crossing over and goods come into Mombasa and come across on the road, so there is some exchange. Not so much Tanzania, a little bit more Rwanda. The school that we work with in Lake Mbura National Park, that village was actually founded by the government with Rwandan refugees. So that whole village is Rwandan heritage. and over on that west side, when it's close to Rwanda, there's a fair amount of back and forth. But those countries are not what the tribes were, are not where the tribes were. Those countries are where the British and the Belgians and the French decided them to be. So there are tribes that are South Sudan and Uganda, or Rwanda and Western Uganda, that are the same tribe. They just happen to be on other sides of the border because that's where somebody drew a line. But those tribes didn't have that line there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the borders in Africa were just, oh, we'll just draw a border here, and they really don't have anything to do with what the tribes are.
And Uganda was used as Kenya's breadbasket. Winston Churchill called Uganda the pearl of Africa. It's very fertile. I mean, it's a little bit like the mountains of Nicaragua. You could throw a stick out and something would grow, other than way up in the north. And
really? Yeah.
So Kampala is 3,000 feet above sea level. So it's beautiful weather. And they developed Kenya, and they developed a big road system, and they developed some cities. They really didn't develop Uganda because they used it as their plantation. Basically, they used Uganda as Kenya's plantation breadbasket. And so Uganda doesn't have nearly as much infrastructure and stuff left over from those times that as Kenya does. But it's a little bit less aggressive, and even when they have protests and stuff, they don't get as deadly as the ones in Kenya. They don't protest crazy after every election and all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit calmer of a country than Kenya. Kenya's a little bit volatile.
Yeah. Kenya's a little bit volatile. Yeah. So did you didn't spend any time though in the nearby countries, as you pointed out? Not really. It's just mostly Uganda.
No, I mean, my son's lived in Tanzania, but I didn't visit him. He actually came to Uganda. I went to Uganda while he was in Tanzania, but it was the end of his time there, so he came to Uganda. I didn't actually. I would love to go. He climbed Kilimanjaro, so that was cool.
Yeah, I've heard that's actually a fairly well. It's not really a. You don't really have to be a climber. I mean, you can just kind of hike.
No, he didn't practice. He decided to go with some friends that he had met, and he has asthma.
But I mean, it's for him. Yeah.
It's a 6-day. I mean, it's intense because it's the oxygen and everything. But
but I've also heard that you really don't have to climb it. You can just hike up it.
Basically,
like hiking up the stairs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you have to, get out your ropes and get out your spikes. And all that stuff.
No. I mean, if you go on the Kenyan side, I think it's like that. But on the Tanzanian side, it's more of a pretty steep in places, but it's more of a walk.
Yeah, it's still of a walk, and obviously you have to carry your tent and all that stuff with you, so you're carrying an extra 30 or 40 pounds on your back while you hike.
And the oxygen is. I mean, they were taking people were throwing up right and left.
I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, I went to Bogota, a while ago, and that's only only between 8,000 and 9,000 feet, and that was. So I don't know if I would ever try to go. I'd probably go back to Bogota before I'd ever try to go back to anything higher than Bogota, or just because I don't know if I want to, see how I handle it. I've noticed that if I go up to 4,000 or 5,000, I'm pretty much okay. I do notice that sometimes you also can get drier because you have very thin air, so that can really dry you out. But there's a lot of different things that can factor into what happens. But yeah, you don't really know how you're going to react to that elevation until you get up that high. I mean, but I do know.
And if you decide to come, you go up, and if you are throwing up or you want, if you start coming down, you can't go back up.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a one shot. That's it. You go up and you do it, or you don't make it. That's it. Yeah. You don't get to hang around and do it later tomorrow.
What do they do? Do they have somebody escort you back down if you? Or, I mean, obviously, because you really should never go into any place like that alone.
Yeah, no, they have. I mean, for them, I'm sure there are people who get permits who are experts, but you go with guides, and they take you and do the camps and make sure. And if you ever start oxygen, then you have to keep on the oxygen too. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay. Yeah. So so it's 6 days up to go Kilimanjaro and then 6 days back down or something, or maybe
No, 2 days down. 6 days up, 2 days down, because they have to get you adjusted to the oxygen. So you take medication
hmm
to help you, and then you go up slow enough so that you are adjusting to the different levels because it's,
Yeah.
I don't know, 15,600 something feet. I don't know. I have a picture of him next to the sign that says what it is. I can't remember. It's over 15,000. So
It's more like 19
um,
or 20, but yeah, it's a
then you get up at like 3 in the morning because they want you to be at the summit for the sunrise. So you hike all day and then you get up at 2 or 3 in the morning and then hike in the dark and it's cold by now. And you know, then you're up there for the sunrise. And it's funny because there's a Kilimanjaro beer, and so everybody brings a Kilimanjaro beer, and everybody apparently says, we're going to toast and everybody's so sick and nauseated by the time they get up there that they hold the beer up, but then they just pour it out or carry it back. They don't ever drink it. So,
yeah, it's
but
got
he hated it while he was doing it. I mean, I made him save his phone so he could take pictures at the top because he was 19, and then he's texting me on the way down and he was absolutely miserable. Everything hurt, he had the asthma. It was hard to get up, all that stuff. And I said, one day you're going to say it's the best thing you ever did. And now at 26, he said it's one of the best things he ever did, but he hated it while he was
but he's
doing it.
not going to go back and do it again, I bet. Or
No, he said every once in a while I think about it and then I really think about it and I don't want to do it again. But he's glad he did it.
I bet that's real. I bet that's an experience that really brings everybody together too. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels like you've got friends for life just after doing something like that. It's
Yeah, for
and
sure.
obviously it's easier to go back down. Although from what I hear, there's actually more deaths and injuries when climbers are going down than going up. Maybe it's because they're going too
Probably.
fast, but
They're
obviously,
probably going faster and they are
yeah,
tired. I mean,
yeah,
between the oxygen deprivation
yeah.
and the exertion, it's probably a combination.
But obviously, you don't get tired as much going down the steps as you get doing
Yeah,
going
but
up.
it's bad for your knee. It's hard on your knees. He had one knee that was giving him a lot of problems coming down.
Yeah, maybe if you'd like take a brace or something and things like that just to keep you up and
Yeah. Well, he didn't plan. He even had rented shoes. I mean, he was living in Tanzania. It's not cold, so he had to go rent everything to do it.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, and you got to usually pay a guide to do something like that. It usually costs you sometimes in the thousands of dollars.
yeah.
Although it's not like some of these people who try to take people up Everest, even though the people have no climbing experience whatsoever.
That's crazy.
I mean, do they do any pre-qualifying on something like this? I mean,
I don't think for the one in Tanzania. I don't think for doing
yeah,
Kilimanjaro. I mean, maybe they just assess you because obviously if someone was visibly
yeah,
physically not able to, I'm sure they don't want to have a big issue. They don't want somebody to have a heart attack or,
yeah.
whatever. But my son was volunteering while he was there and he had met some young Australian doctors, and they decided at the last minute to do it. And they're like, hey, they come and do it with us. So
Yeah.
like 3 days before they went, he's like, so I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I mean that's what I mean. Obviously somebody who weighs maybe 300 pounds or somebody who already had a heart attack or a stroke,
Right.
they might say no, we don't think so. And not to
Right.
mention, you're also in a place that if something does go wrong, that you're not going to be able to get help very easily.
No, no,
I don't know if they do. If they maybe would send up a helicopter or something like that, but that's all really expensive. I mean,
yeah.
that's
Yeah, I'm sure in Moshi, because that's where people go through, I'm sure they have some sort of search and rescue just because that's like the place where people go. And so like at a ski resort, if you just go out snowshoeing or cross country skiing in some random location, good luck getting help. But if you're at a ski resort, they've got search and rescue or whatever. So I'm sure they have something, but it's not the same kind of something that we would have in a Western country.
yeah. So, what places have you really liked in Europe?
Like I said, I am not a city person at all, but I do love London. I don't think I would want to live in London, but I could stay in London for a few months. I do love the Cotswolds in England. We went. My sixth grade teacher was from there, and she still owned her family house. So my family rented when I was in college. We rented that house out, and we stayed there for 6 weeks or something and just explored all over, went to Gloucester. I mean, I love that whole very bucolic, agricultural, the area. I loved Wales. We went to Belgium. There were some places in Belgium that were beautiful. France was fine, but I mean, I know most people are like, "Oh, France," and maybe I shouldn't go to those France places. Um, I I did love Greece, and my daughter did well, it was called a semester abroad, but it was a 3-week trip, so I don't know why they call it a semester. But anyway, she went in the summer, and they went to like Santorini and those beautiful islands. We went in January, and it was freezing, and we didn't do that. But I loved Crete. Um, I loved just even some of the countryside. Again, I'm the sailor small town girl, so the cities are not, Athens didn't impress me. Cairo was loud and smelled bad, and there were so many people honking their horns that you couldn't sleep. um, but yeah, I mean, I'm pretty easy. I just am not a big city person. I like a city for a few days, and then I want to go out and somewhere where it's just I can hike. I love to hike, so I want to go somewhere where I can hike and really sit and talk to people and get a feel for it versus the city thing.
Yeah, and I think in most countries too, the cities are different from the countries. It's
Mm-hmm.
obviously though you go out to the countries, it's harder to find people who speak English. But I mean, not in England, of course, but even in Europe,
Right.
that's getting to be pretty easy. I mean,
Yeah.
what places in the world are you optimistic about right now? I mean, for their future. I mean,
Yeah. I don't know.
it's
I have not felt hugely optimistic. I think I just read this article right before I went to my errand before I got on with you about, this whole KTF or whatever that FTC, whatever that whole crypto thing was that, they're going to use that to bring in the digital dollar. And I'm like, I don't know where you escape that. I mean, I think countries like Uganda that they're not going to the digital dollar, I can assure you, or some little, Dominica in the Caribbean or somewhere in the Abacos in the Bahamas where they don't care what's happening in the rest of the world. If you need to go somewhere and still work, then you're going to be tied to those places that have good internet and have good electricity. And so those are also going to be the places that are at the mercy of all of these Western countries trying to control everything. So I don't know.
yeah.
I always tell my kids I could be a professional hermit. So I'm thinking now it might be a good time to be the professional hermit.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it's a yeah. I wonder too, but some of these countries are getting more involved with cryptocurrency. I don't know if you heard, but
Like El Salvador.
The Central African Republic also made Bitcoin legal tender. Although I don't know anybody who's even ever visited that country.
No, I mean El Salvador's done it, and I don't. I think blockchain probably has a future, but I don't know that it's the blockchain that we have right now. I follow a Substack from El Gato Malo, who's great, and he talks a
Yes.
lot. He's very smart, and a lot of it's like right over my head. But he's done several things about how blockchain really could work and really actually protect people's privacy, actually provide like election integrity and all that sort of stuff. And it's very interesting. I just don't know who's motivated to do it in a privacy oriented way anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely something out there that I wonder too, but I also it's really disheartening as somebody who's been involved with tech for a long time who saw it as a force for good and to see it get subverted into a force for evil. And it's ultimately one reason why I was skeptical about Bitcoin for a while, because I said the beauty of cryptocurrency, though, is it can't really be consolidated or merged.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what airlines you fly, but it seems like every time I fly on American Airlines, I'll ask the person there, says, "Hey, how long you been with the airline?" They'll say, "Well, actually, I started with this airline, and and we went through several mergers." That's not going to happen with crypto.
Yeah.
Which is one good thing.
Yeah.
It won't be consolidated. And if you're older than I am, you can remember when every bank was just a single bank.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago.
I remember when the ATM first came out, because my dad, when they very first came out, let me do the card in there. You put the card in, and it slowly took it in. You put and I mean, it was the coolest thing, have the ATM. Wow. That was the big banking progress, was to have an ATM.
Yeah, things have certainly progressed, and I don't know if it's progressed for the better or for the worse, because it seems like we have more access to more information, but I don't know how it's being used. I mean, so you're not really that confident about anywhere in Europe. What do you traveling around? Where do you think America is headed?
I live in the South, and I feel very positive. I'm a 7th generation Floridian, so I'm pretty happy with. I don't live there now, but my mom still lives there. I have other family in Florida. Florida is definitely doing the things right. In general, the South seems to be doing things right. Like during COVID, our state, we're a very red state, but we have a couple of very blue areas, and our governor was insane. And so, they're doing all this lockdown. Where I am right now in this county, it's a very North Carolina is the 4th biggest agricultural state in the country. We're big ag, huge agriculture department, very pro agriculture and rural and all that stuff. So this is a very agriculture heavy rural county. You would not have known anything was happening. Not with the BLM riots, not with the COVID, nothing. Nobody wore a mask. Every race and whatever was acting just like normal. Nothing ever happened. I mean, you just wouldn't have known anything was going on. And I think the way to save it, whatever it becomes, is to do it locally, because I think the capture is at the top, but people are not happy at the bottom. And so I think, changing school boards, getting involved in all those elections that most people don't even ever vote in anymore, because it's like, I don't know anybody in the school board. I don't have any kids in the school. I mean, those are the places that I think the positives is at the local level, towns and cities and counties, and then regions in the heartland and here in the South, where we just aren't doing some of that. We're just not doing it here, and people will think you're crazy when you're doing it. So I don't know. That's the only hope I have. I read a lot of Substacks and news and opinion, and I overall am pretty pessimistic.
I think I didn't realize North Carolina was had that much agriculture, but I guess I'm not really surprised. Of course, a lot of it's probably tobacco, but still.
No, we're the top turkey producer. We're the 4th biggest hog producer. We're way up in corn and soy.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So okay. Yeah, I mean, it's big. It's the 4th biggest ag state. So we're a big agriculture state.
But I also think when you have a state where people realize, oh, food has to be grown. I mean, we don't just go to the grocery store and get it. It doesn't just show up there. Right. It has to. There's a process involved. And we have supply chains, and this is why we can't just arbitrarily shut down the economy over a pseudo emergency.
Right.
We have all these things that interlock and work together.
I think that's a lot of people called it different things, but it was sort of the virtual class and then the makers and the builders. I mean, all the people who were delivering all that stuff to all those people who have no idea where it came from my state. I mean, we're growing all that stuff, but North Carolina has, I mean, we have a huge state farmers market in Raleigh where I live, when I'm not here. There's one in Greensboro and one in Charlotte that are part of the state-run farmers markets. I used to have a bakery, and I had a specialty food product. I was part of a program called Got to B&C, and they promote North Carolina products worldwide. They'll help you go to places to promote North Carolina products. I mean, ag is huge here in North Carolina. So, that is a positive because, most of the counties here were 68 to 78% red. And those are all rural counties, all ag counties, all the people who understand what's going on. It's not the place where the universities are and the Research Triangle Park and where all these people just on their computers and stuff it's where the people are. We also in this county have a lot of boat builders. Boat building is no joke. I mean, they're building $8 million boats right a mile down the road from me. There's a lot of people employed in that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's a lot of boating in the Outer Banks too, of course. Yeah, people.
Yeah, we're in the southern Outer Banks, so we're fishing, ag, huge seafood, tons of shrimp, and I've got shrimp boats going by my house all the time. So, yeah.
Not to mention,
and I think that's where the real life, because people see real life. You can't be fooled when you understand how hard it is to go catch a pound of shrimp.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't just call the grocery store. They have even people in small boats that get a license to do it more commercially, who are pulling skeins to get shrimp during the season. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to clean a lot of fish to get enough to eat. I mean, people understand that.
Yeah. Statistically, being a fisherman is also one of the most dangerous jobs you can do still.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like every list I read, it's either that or being a lumberjack.
Yeah.
I mean, a job that you're most likely to be killed on the line of duty.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's very important work. I mean, there's a lot of things that these people do. It's very much, yeah. So yeah. What about, what are you optimistic about, say, in the Western Hemisphere? I mean, as far as.
I mean, I think the problem, as I said, I think the problem is the capture at the top. The universities and the government people and that whole elite class where they all know each other and they all sat around in pajamas during COVID and those people. I think the positive is all the rest of the people that the COVID lockdowns really red-pilled them and opened their eyes about what all those other people were doing quietly, because they stopped doing it quietly. I mean, they said the quiet parts out loud, and if somebody tells you something that you should believe them. And I think during the last 3 years, people realized they've been saying this, but we didn't believe it. But now we need to believe it. And the problem is that they're entrenched in the IRS. They're entrenched in the Defense Department. They're entrenched in the intelligence community, but they're not entrenched in my neighborhood, and they're not entrenched in my town. And that's where you can start, I think, making a positive difference. I think the economy is going to tank and make everything have to be more local, because the supply chain and the costs of things. I think, we're going to have some retro reliability issues where our neighbors are going to be a whole lot more important than the UPS guy. So I think that's a positive, though, because I think the last few years where people, it has sucked to have, this little bag of groceries be $72 and all that. But I do think people are waking up to things like First Amendment, Second Amendment here, and that there is this thing like we understand the supply chain because we're all part of it, and you guys don't have any idea what you're doing. And I think that's a positive, regardless of how it turns out.
I think there's a section of the American people who have been looking for a new direction for a long time, but every time they get behind somebody that they think will might be the solution to the problems, that person ends up not being the solution. And you can go back and as far as looking to the the Nixon landslide of 1972, or Reagan in 1980, or Trump in 2016.
Yep.
And I think Trump's presidency probably wouldn't have been that bad but then he totally gets then he totally goes and promotes this whole thing, and a lot of his supporters just pretend that he didn't promote it, but he did, and then he destroyed any good he might have accomplished just by promoting it, and then I think he realized, oh no, I just ruined myself, but
he doubled down on it. I mean, he's out there doubling down on it now. But I think what we as a people have to realize, and not just in America, any Western country anyway, where we do theoretically have some choices, is that there isn't anybody that's going to come and save us.
Yeah, and
there's not one person. No, what? Because even if Trump had not been a little bit insane, I mean, I voted for him. I thought he did some good things. I thought he did some stupid things. He should have fired Fauci like day one. He didn't do that. All that, whatever. But even had he been a genius and more personality wise like DeSantis, a little bit less likely to just go off like a crazy person, DeSantis isn't going to save us. Trump isn't going to save us. We're going to have to save us. We're all going to have to decide that if it's worth saving, we're going to have to do some work. And
well,
I don't want to do that any more than anybody else, but that's the only way it's going to happen for my grandkids.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem too, though, is as you pointed out, the intellectual corruption, as far as I know, is everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it be at Harvard and Yale here, or, whether I suppose it's as bad as Oxford, as bad at Oxford, or at some of these other
probably
elite colleges elsewhere. I don't know. And that is a problem that has been, I agree, nobody's going to save us, but I mean, how does somebody fix these systems, where these systems that don't serve us, and make the federal government less destructive than it is? I mean,
I think that's where the whole parallel economy ideas are coming in, because you can't get rid of Harvard. I mean, how are you going to get rid of Harvard? You're not going to get rid of Harvard, and you're not going to get rid of the crazy people that Harvard is producing. The best, I mean, this is the whole, hard times make hard men, and hard whatever, that whole, I can't ever remember it. But these people have never had to face reality. The stuff that the whole transgender thing, the whole defund the police, this is not reality. This is just, I sat around and I thought, wow, wouldn't this be great? And then I decided to do it, or it was real. You have a war, or you have a famine, or you have the Great Depression, then all of a sudden, guess what? Those people wake up. Now, not all of them, because there's always been those crazy people, but a number of them. But until something bad happens, most people don't, they just keep going. And it's really hard, that cognitive dissonance about, so I took 5 shots because I believe the shot. I believe the people. Now, whether or not I think you should have done your research and not taken 5 shots, let's just say you believe them, you trusted them, you took 5 shots. It is now going to be nigh on impossible to convince that person that they were lied to, that they were gullible, that they believed it, because they have invested not just their time and energy, but their physical body into an idea that they don't want to they're not going to want to let go.
And it sometimes makes me wonder if some of these people want to be lied to.
Yeah, well,
I don't know. I mean, do you have
a lot of them just want to be on the right side. I just want to be on the right side. I mean, we have seen how many people will believe anything in the last 2 years, if there's nothing else.
Yeah.
I mean, wholeheartedly buy into literal insanity.
I've largely come to the conclusion that, it's not necessarily that they're dumb or that they're corrupt, but that they're just what I would say creatures of hysteria.
Yeah.
I mean, have you been paying attention to what's been happening in the NFL recently?
Well,
The National
only
Football.
that they're all woke. I mean,
No, but the guy
the
after
guy
a
that
after
Damon, yeah,
Damar Hamlin. I mean,
yeah,
okay, I understand. Somebody collapses on the field. Yes, you should stop the game and attend to the injury. You should, and do what you have to do to get him, get him healthy if he's having an issue. And if you have to take him off the field when you can safely move him, you safely move him. I mean, I've been at football games where where the delay was a half hour, but I can't imagine why you would just not go back to playing the game and at least finishing the game. I'm just
well,
thinking,
I think that was because he literally died on the field. So
yeah,
I think that was the teammates, just the
yeah.
teams just couldn't manage it. I
But I'm
mean,
also thinking to myself, how you're going to have to do this, finish this game sometime.
yeah,
I mean, are you thinking ahead? And you can't have well, you can, but it's not really fair to have a situation where two teams just play one less game than everybody else.
yeah,
It's not going to be easy to reschedule these games. You've and there was a situation down here in Texas at a high school game where a guy actually, he was sitting on the bench where he did have to be defibrillated at the game. And and one thing that happened was he had some kind of situation, but one thing he said is that he'd never play football again, but he ended up recovering. But I mean, I've seen guys get paralyzed, and
mhm,
I mean, that's always the scariest thing is when you see a backboard. It's that, oh no,
yeah.
there's a backboard. But but they still finish the game. I'm just thinking,
Yeah, it's hard. I was a diver in college, and I I
yeah,
was diving, and the guy in front of me went and did the exact same dive that I was gonna do,
yeah,
whacked his head, became unconscious. They
yeah,
had to fish him out of the pool. The paramedics had to come. They did all this stuff on the side of the pool, and then I had to get up right after, as soon as they
yeah.
were done, and do the exact same. And let me tell you how far away I was from the diving board.
Was he
Like,
whacked his head on the board or whacked his head on the
yeah,
platform?
on
Okay,
the
yeah,
board.
okay,
And
yeah,
I mean, I was so far from the board. They gave
yeah,
me good scores, but only because I did it, not
yeah,
because of the dive. And I mean, I remember sitting there going, "You are not going to make me do this right after." So I mean, I
yeah,
get it a little bit from both sides. I
yeah,
don't know. I mean, that whole thing was very. I just while I saw right before I came in and saw that there might be some positive signs with him. I think a lot of
yeah.
people thought he was probably brain dead, but he
Yeah, I
may
mean,
not be.
I
So that's
hope
good.
it all works out, but it's not, and it's not like stopping the game is going to help him any. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I just that's what
Yeah.
it seems like
I don't know.
it seems like the and really the hysteria I think goes all the way back to the World Trade Center. I don't know. It's I mean, in a crisis, you need to stay calm and just say, okay, we'll get through this. And sometimes I wonder if maybe religion was a more positive influence because at least if people were religious, they'd all get around. Okay, let's say a prayer and just ask God. And that it's almost like, even though I know no, I'm a fan of Ayn Rand and I don't really pray anymore, but I can understand why prayer would give people solace in a time like that
Mhm.
and give them some
Well, and
comfort.
yeah, if you're a believer, then, I mean, a lot of people who are believers had an easier time in COVID because they weren't worried about where, I mean, I'm a Christian. I'm like, okay, I'm going to die. I know where
Yeah,
I'm going. So I'm not that worried about it. I think
yeah,
so many people are so secular and
yeah,
so into themselves and just about themselves. And so many people are mentally ill and all of this that, it's so easy to freak everybody out with the
yes.
easiest, most ridiculous. I mean, that's the thing is some of it's so ridiculous. You're like, when this whole COVID first started, I said to my husband, "This people aren't going to do this. People aren't going to stay home. Who's going to do that?" And then, lo and behold,
I'm
all these people did it.
and Jennings, I understand you're religious, but if anybody could have stood up to this, I think it would have been the churches.
It
If
should have
all of the
been. They
churches, I mean,
failed badly.
if the Pope, I mean, if religion is not lost credibility after this, it never will. That's really how I feel. I mean,
well, or yeah, I mean the Catholic Church is a whole other
yeah,
issue. I know the church that we were going to prior to COVID. I mean,
yeah.
they stopped services and mass, and we stopped going there. We didn't go there
There were,
anymore because
yeah,
I was
and there
like,
were some churches who said no. And certainly the
right.
Amish, the Amish said and there were a few churches here and there who said no, I'm not
Yeah,
I'm
there
not
were a lot
abiding.
of church. There were in our area. There were a lot of churches, and the churches were sort of left alone. I mean, in California, the churches that stayed open and were getting fined millions of dollars won their
Yeah,
court cases, and the state had to pay them because they said
yeah,
you can't shut the churches down when you're letting the liquor store and the grocery store stay open. You can't shut the churches down.
yeah, and you're talking about the liquor store. That was the first thing that came to my mind. Not churches, but people who have to go to their Alcoholics Anonymous meetings
Yeah.
and people like that. I mean, and those people, whether or not you agree with it, I mean, a lot of those people, say, if I don't go to my meetings, I will have a relapse. And
Right. Well, and
and,
then
and
they
you know,
left the liquor stores open so to make sure you could go. I mean, it was.
yeah,
I remember. I told my husband this was the analogy I used. This is really what I thought would happen. It was so eye opening. It didn't. When I was in elementary school, I think elementary school, they decided that America was going to go to the metric system. I don't know how old you are. I don't know if you were in school at
yeah,
this time, but
they were pushing the metric system a lot. And
right. And
I think it probably,
America said no. They taught it in
yeah,
school and we didn't do it. Nobody knows the metric
yeah,
system here. And I said to my husband, I said, that's what people are going to do about this whole locking down. People are going to be just like the metric system, like you are crazy. No, we're not doing it. And but they did do it.
well, the metric system is one of those things that I think in the long term, it would be beneficial, but the costs of changing over to it are so great that they're not going to do it.
Well, and Americans, I mean,
Yeah,
people,
because America is one of the few
we
countries
just
that use it.
said, no,
Yeah,
that's stupid. It's European. We're perfectly fine with
yeah,
our feet and our inches. We don't need to do this and
yeah,
screw it. So they still taught it in every class, and America didn't care. The government
yeah.
said, and Americans said, no. And
But
I really thought that that's what would happen
and
with
it is
the
used in a lot of,
lockdowns.
and it is used in a lot of places like most of the science, most of the medicine. I mean, that's mostly in
Right. Well, I had a
metric.
bakery and I baked in grams. I mean, it was fine. But my point was not the metric system. My point was
Yeah,
just the government said, you will do this. And America said, we won't do it,
yeah, there was definitely
regardless of what it was. And that's what I thought would happen with COVID. America,
and
if
we
the
still
government says and Americans say no.
do the metric system to a large. I mean, I mean, all the international swimming competitions and running competitions and track and field are all in metrics because that's just how the world does it. I mean, it's
Right. Right. And like I said, my point wasn't the metric system. My point was just government mandating something that America said no.
And if you have a Toyota, all your parts and stuff there, require metric tools and metric units too, as well. I mean, I don't know if that applies to. I have a Toyota. I don't know if that applies to other Japanese cars, but it probably does. So, I think America probably will eventually go over to the metric system, but it'll probably be slow. And in some ways, a lot of the other English-speaking countries haven't completely transitioned either, but you still hear them talk in other units. But but I know what you're saying. I'm not really surprised just mainly because of the reaction after the World Trade Center really said to me, well, if they'll put up with this, they'll put up with anything. And I don't think if people would have tolerated the things that happened after the World Trade Center, I don't think this would have ever been pushed through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, they've been chipping away. I do think that, when you watch a movie and the bad guy, like the good guy doesn't become the hero because he's like, it's not bad enough, I'm not getting involved. And then the moment comes where the bad guy does, and you're like, you shouldn't have done that because now the good guy is going to come in. I do think they way overplayed their hand, and I think a lot of people have woken up. My worry is that it's way too late and way too many people.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a libertarian for a long time, and I think if our message had been heeded maybe 50 years ago, we could have prevented a lot of problems. But now it's just going to be a lot harder to turn things back. the way things are now. And that's one reason why I am still optimistic about cryptocurrency, is because I do see it as maybe the best hope here. If you can, it's not something that they can really defeat or politicize, but I don't know. It's really hard to say. What is there anything else here? Anything else here? Maybe so you really not optimistic about anywhere in the world today, then? So,
well, I mean, I think okay, I'll put it this way. I think there are places you can go. I don't think there are places that you can go that you can live the lifestyle that you live in the Western part of the world, in what we call the West. I realize that some of it's not the West, but what we call the West, the developed nation. I think the places that are gonna be the holdouts for whatever reason, corruption by the governments or whatever, are gonna be the developing nations, because you can't flip a switch in Uganda and everybody go to cryptocurrency or digital dollar or digital shilling. You can't, because they don't even have power, most of them. How are they going to do that? You can't do that. So, I am not very optimistic about the West. I am a student of history to some degree, and, civilizations rise and fall. And I think we are in the fall. Now, how fast we fall, I have a grandson and another grandson due in a month. So this is not a happy opinion that I want to have, because obviously I don't want them growing up in that. But I have told my husband for about 15 years, I said, the only way to save America is to have an EMP take the internet out. And I still believe that. Because if people actually had to talk to each other, and if people actually had to do work, even a typewriter versus a keyboard on a word processor, we wouldn't be here, because people would understand what it takes to produce. And they wouldn't be able to go to their tribes, and they wouldn't be able to be perverted, all the little groups that they have that can do all of these really crazy things, because it wouldn't be possible. But as long as it's possible, they're going to do it.
But would people even be aware of what's going on if they
what was going on? But if I'm not aware of it, they can't. And then there's no internet and way to bring it to me. Like if it's happening in DC, this is, America got left alone by DC. Politics wasn't something anybody talked about. I grew up, you don't talk about politics and religion because it didn't affect your everyday life. Because they didn't have any way to make it affect your everyday life except for like taxes and stuff. I mean, what could they do? You didn't even, back before telephones, you didn't even know who the president was until they got some note to you in your town somewhere.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think a thing about having people get together. I mean, I see, to a certain extent, I still see that in a lot of other countries. I often say, if when I get in better shape, I could still go out and try to, I sometimes say, that when I get in better shape, I can still try to, pick up women in their 20s, because, well, I at least I at least have the courage to approach women. Whereas a lot of guys, because I hate trying to meet women online. It just seems like, but you never know what happens anymore. But, and what do you also think, about I think what worries me about America too, though, is, and, you talked about kids. My grandfather walked to school 2 miles each way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you still see in a lot of places like Uganda, the kids, my grandfather walked to school as a first grader 2 miles each way.
Yeah.
In a place like Uganda, you might still see that as well. But
everybody walks
where you're not letting kids do anything, and you have this extended childhood. And that's one reason why I'm maybe a little more optimistic about some of these places that do seem a little more backward. Because kids are, my mother once left me in the car with the motor running. I've lived to tell the tale.
Of course, I left my kids in the car with the motor running. They didn't want to go into Target.
When you hear about Child Protective Services, now you don't want to do it for too long, obviously, but if you leave your kids in the car for 5 minutes, it's no big, and it's not 0 degrees outside. it's no big deal. I mean, we've
No.
gotten to this point where kids aren't allowed to take risks, and in some cases, I
Well,
think,
safetyism is how we got the whole COVID thing because
yeah,
we are promoting being safe at all costs instead of. And
yeah,
what kills me is we're the same people who do the what do they call those X Games are also
mm,
the ones talking about you got to wear your mask. I'm like, you're out doing extreme sports. Why are you
well, yeah.
worried about COVID?
Well, there was this poll I just saw recently where they were on a campus, and they were on bicycles. They were wearing masks, but they weren't wearing helmets. And I'm thinking, like, what the?
Yeah,
Yeah,
or wearing a
helmet is.
mask and not wearing a seatbelt or
You
whatever. I
probably should be
mean,
wearing. Yeah, yeah. That's one thing I tell your kids nowadays to have them watch a sitcom from the 50s and the 60s, like Leave It to
oh yeah,
Beaver, and see how kids lived, or even watch the original Bad News Bears movie. That's another good example.
yeah. No, my
Yeah,
kids were raised on Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. My son
yeah,
started hunting with another teenage boy at
yeah,
14. My kids were babysitting and working and doing their own laundry and paying for their own toiletries and traveling the world. My
yeah.
daughter and son-in-law, when they first got married, drove around the country for 5 months and went to national parks and camped everywhere.
Um,
So, my kids are not those kids.
yeah, yeah.
Thank
Well,
goodness.
and I think seeing kids pilot canoes in Peru, and when they're like 5 years, 6 years old, they're not wearing life jackets.
No,
You there is
no.
one. Yeah, it's definitely. I don't know. So it's well, I was hoping you'd be more optimistic. But so, how did you get involved with the Expat Money Summit? What motivated you to get involved with that?
I did a podcast with Mikkel.
Mm.
So Glenn Glyer did,
Yeah, yeah, Greg Glyer. Yeah,
yeah, great, yeah.
yeah,
And I did a podcast with Mikkel. He was totally anti-charity. I mean, like completely anti-charity. Didn't believe in charity. Didn't believe, and literally, he says that interview changed his life. He's on our board now, the board of 1018, and because we do it differently, we don't do it like charities do. So he connected me to Gret, and that's how we got on DonorSee, and we're one of DonorSee's most successful accounts to raise money with Gret's crowdfunding sort of platform where we do videos and all that. If you don't know it, you should go check it out because it's a pretty cool way to do fundraising.
yeah,
And so he donated to us and kind of helped us with donated some staff time for tech, and then got on our board.
yeah,
I guess about a year ago. He's been on our board about a year, maybe a little over a year.
yeah. And unfortunately, Gret is no longer with us.
Yeah,
We
I
don't know
know.
why, but it sounds like he was.
Oh,
know
I know why. That his wife's ex-boyfriend came and killed him while he was sleeping.
Oh my gosh,
While she was in the bed next to him.
I
He
wasn't
stabbed
sure.
him to
Yeah,
death.
it's he sounds like he was such a great guy. I mean,
Yeah, he was. I talked to him on the phone a lot because I'm older than a lot of people. Well, all their
yeah,
staff is in their like late 20s, early 30s, and then a
yeah,
lot of the people that do the videos are young. So I am like the old lady of the group. And
mhm,
so I would say, I think you guys, this is not working. You need to do this. And so he would call me. We'd have like 45-minute, hour-long conversations. He's like, I'm taking notes because I'm a very practical, problem-solving person. And there
yeah,
were things about how DonorSee worked that just didn't work right. It didn't work
yeah,
well. It didn't work like optimally. And so
yeah,
I'm like, I'm the squeaky wheel. I'm gonna tell you the things, and they've done a lot of those things. I mean, he was very there. They, as a culture, are very receptive to suggestions, and that
yeah.
came from him. That came from him.
I think you have to be. And I've got to say, in my work experience, my best supervisors have been older women like yourself. I mean, they really. I think it's because they just know how to see the big picture, and they know how to, and they also are very good at reading people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know who really works, and you know who just tries to get by with playing
Right.
politics, and uh,
Right.
I yeah. So it sounds like you're doing a lot of great work. I hope it works out
Well,
for you
thank
with your
you.
kids. Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Your
you. I
philosophy
appreciate
of
it.
world schooling, and it's certainly been an interesting conversation. Well, so do you have anything else you want to say before we go?
No, it's been great. Very wide ranging. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really just interview people, although I always have topics on here. It's been a very interesting. And when we started, I didn't have the lights on, and now the sun's went down outside. It's gotten a little dark.
So
So
you're glowing.
yeah, I need to, yeah, but yeah, it's been a learning experience, but it's certainly been interesting. I reached out to quite a few people on this show, on the show, because the Expat Money Summit was a very interesting summit, and it's nice to hear. I hope we can get things going back in better in the world. Greg also pointed out a statistic too. He said the child mortality rate had dropped, I think 28 straight years or something like that going into 2020. And he said, I bet this is going to go up. So
yeah, well, and the high rate of teenage pregnancy, and it wasn't just Uganda; it was all of the developing world.
yeah,
Probably, a lot of those, that's high risk. So
yeah,
you add those babies in there, and then things like parents killing their children because they can't feed them.
oh yeah,
And yeah, so,
it's
but
really,
Uganda has
really
a really flat line of COVID. If you look at the whole world like a chart, it's all up here. Uganda is like this tiny little line at the bottom. So
yeah. Well, I hope things get better in Africa. I hope things get better around the world.
you.
Well, thank you very much, Jennings. It's been great
All
having
right.
you on here. Please like the video. Please subscribe, comment if you like it, share it with your friends.
Will do. You guys send me a link.
Yeah, this is the Fountainhead Forum, and yeah, and did you say you had a channel too or not?
Mm-mm.
Okay, yeah,
No,
okay. Because
I
do.
Is this the link, or will there be like a YouTube?
No, there'll be a YouTube link, and I need to get on some other platforms. But I have shared. But if people have their own channels on YouTube, I do give them the video files, and they have uploaded it to their channel as well.
Oh yeah, 1018 has a YouTube channel. I just don't have like a podcast.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to do that or not, but we can certainly work that out. But thank you very much for coming on, Jennings Wright. It's been great having you. Bye-bye.
I really appreciate it. Bye.